Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the channel. My name is John, if you don't know, and I want to start off by introducing what it's one of the stranger books that I have here, but it's by an author that probably most of you will know, Honoré de Balzac. My Journey from Paris to Java. The reason I say it's one of the stranger books is because it is probably the shortest book that I've ever had as an adult. Of course, as children, we all have little picture books and things like that. But, this is 64 pages, including a bibliography, an introduction, and an afterword. And it really just doesn't quite hold up as a book in its own right. But nevertheless, it's an interesting short piece. I would, if you can find I wouldn't necessarily recommend looking for it by itself, but if you can find an anthology that includes it, it's worth the read. Um, for a couple of reasons. For one, and this is another reason why it's so strange, is if you're familiar at all with Balzac, you're probably familiar with him for his gritty, realistic portrayals of 19th century Paris. And this could not be further from that. Uh, because, well, for one thing, it's the one of the least realistic books that I've read, and that includes a lot of fantasy novels, because Balzac never went to Java. The premise of this, My Journey from Paris to Java, is a fantasy, and his Java is not based on the actual island in what's today Indonesia. At the time was the Dutch East Indies. It's based on essentially fantasy, and so when you're reading this, you can't go into this thinking that you're going to get, a 19th century travelogue, although it is framed as a 19th century travelogue. Instead, what you should go into this thinking of it as is a 19th century French Orientalist fantasy, and that's what you're going to get. And and it has all of those obsessions that European Orientalists of the 18th and 19th century had with the East, with dramatic, the dramatic wildlife, the incredible scenery and strange plants, and most notably, beautiful women, because this is obsessed with the idea of Javanese women as some kind of exotic ideal of the female form. And it's actually a little bit creepy to read, to be honest with you. Um, and I don't know if it makes it better or makes it worse that, in all likelihood, Balzac never met a Javanese woman in his life. He certainly never went to Java, as I said. Uh, but yeah, it is very very interesting. Um, I'll give you a brief excerpt to see what I'm talking about here. Javanese women never weep over the men they bury. Having worshipped him more than God, they just forget all about him. There's a similarity here to the perfection of some machine that crushes its inventor. Elsewhere you live for love. In Java, it kills you. Heartless love then seeks its next victim, just as Mother Nature herself follows her own sweet way and takes no notice whatever of her own creatures. Thus, Javanese women consume many European men. So you can kind of see the twin aspects of 18th and 19th century Orientalism, where there's this allure of the mysterious East and the highly sexualized allure of the mysterious East. Because clearly, even from that, uh, he's intrigued by this idea of these, predatory women. But there's also the fear that goes along with it, the fear of being consumed by it. I guess the fear of going native, you might say. Um, and and it kind of goes on like that for about 50 pages because that's all that's here. Uh, the I will say I picked this book up not in Java, but in Bali, having just arrived from Java. I last year I spent about 2 weeks in Java, first in Java and then in Bali, and I picked it up thinking, oh, Balzac, I know him, and kind of expecting an actual journal of a trip to Java. And I thought, that'd be an interesting thing to see, his experiences of it, how he found the island, over 150 some odd years ago. Uh, I was at first a little disappointed by the fact that that's not what this is at all, that it's just a fantasy. But I've actually kind of come to appreciate it because, as I said, the Orientalism that exists in this book, it's it's fantasy. It's not at all realistic, but probably it's not that far off in terms of style and even in terms of content than from some actual 19th century European travelogues of Asia, in that the people, the people who were going to Asia for the most part, were not really seeing it, not really experiencing the culture so much as observing it from the outside. So in many ways, their observations were just as much, products of their own fantasies and their own ideas that they brought with them as what's going on here. And in a way, that's true of even modern travelogues, where for the most part, I think modern travel writers want to get into or get in touch with the cultures that they're seeing. But as a travel writer, you are always looking at the culture from the outside. No matter how much you immerse yourselves in it, no matter how thoroughly you attempt to get into it, unless you are from that culture, you're an outside observer, and that's kind of fine. There's nothing wrong with that, and I think uh, a lot of there's a lot of benefit to looking at a culture from an outside perspective. That's one of the reasons I enjoy reading travelogues of my own country, the U.S. I recently read one. I'll have to do a video of it someday, called "The Inscrutable Americans," which was about the United States from an Indian point of view. That was fascinating. I don't recall the author. I'll look it up. But yeah, so the point though is that even a real travelogue, especially at this time, was heavily influenced by pre-existing biases, pre-existing fantasies, essentially. So taking a look at this as a fantasy travelogue of, you know, a French realist writer's dreams of going to the East, it's not going to tell you much about Java, but it is going to give you something to think about anyway. So, as I said, I don't necessarily recommend this as a volume because it's only what 50 pages or 60 pages, including the critical apparatus. But if you can find it in a if you can find it in an anthology, or if you can get an ebook of it, yeah, give it a read. Especially if you're interested in Balzac, and especially if you're interested in 19th century colonialism or Orientalism, because that's what this is. So anyway, very short video today, but that kind of goes along with a very short book. So thanks for watching, and hope you enjoyed. See you next time.